Joining me now, former State Department Senior Advisor Nayyera Haq. Thanks for being with us. I want to start with the criticism of this deal. Will it lead to more hostage taking?
There's been a challenge with Iran for many years, Marni. I'm sure many of our viewers will remember the Iran hostage crisis of Jimmy Carter's era. So this is a vulnerability for Democrats overall. Now, the challenge with Iran is that there's a great economic opportunity. One of the hostages was a venture capitalist, and that can be very compelling for people to come from Europe or go through other countries to get there. But it is clearly not a safe place for Americans. And the Iranians have been very clear that if Americans evade sanctions and enter their country, they will be held just as accountable as any other Iranians are. Now, this is a harsh regime. It is difficult to live under. The people of Iran are suffering on a daily basis. And the United States really needs to be careful not to play into regime politics.
And does the U.S. lose leverage in a deal such as this?
The interesting thing, Marni, is that two of the Iranians that conceivably Iran wanted back are refusing to leave, and the United States is letting that happen. So the 5 for 5 is a standard protocol. The United States' leverage is pretty strong at this point, right? It has cratered Iran's economy with sanctions. It has effectively eliminated the ability for Iran to develop a nuclear weapon at the pace it was developing before. Now the question becomes, what can be done about Iran's terrorist influence and network around around the Middle East and Africa? To that end, the administration has supported a deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel, Iran's two mortal enemies. So that strategy is about having the Middle East solve its own problems.
And the money is a big part of this, $6 billion. It is to remain in restricted accounts. But is there concern that that will happen?
The financial transactions are pretty transparent, and European powers and the United States have a lot of visibility on where the money is and where it goes. The partner that we have in this is Qatar. We have 5 military bases in Qatar. We have a strong relationship with their government. So there's all reason to consider that Qatar will be holding Iranian money accountable and only letting it be used for humanitarian purposes.
What do you expect the discussions to be at the UN this week, making the practice of taking hostages, wrongfully detaining people from other countries more difficult as it pertains to Iran and other countries?
The biggest challenge we're looking at right now is with the detention of a U.S. journalist and Paul Whelan, a U.S. citizen in Russia with Vladimir Putin. The United States has leverage over Iran and some leverage with Russia, but as you know, Russia is a strong military power with global ambition. So Russia is the one looming large around the UN, especially with Vladimir Zelensky showing up to make the case for Ukraine. But Russia knows how to play the hostage game, and the United States is going to be challenged in trying to meet Russia on that battlefield.
Does this exchange open the door for talks when it comes to Iran's desire to have nuclear weapons, and the U.S. saying they never want Iran to acquire that?
That's been a consistent message from the United States, that any deal would be about making sure Iran did not develop a nuclear weapon. Now, when the Trump administration withdrew from that deal, it did make it difficult for European powers in the United States to get into Iran and verify. That's what the UN inspectors were doing. They were on the ground. So getting them back in the country is one of the pieces of discussion. But now Iran doesn't necessarily have a reason to be negotiating with the United States. So it's challenging. And Iran also has its own internal challenges. We know about the uprising in defense of women's rights that was going on for the last year. They have a massive economic crisis. So elements inside the country don't necessarily support the regime either. The regime also has challenges with its own military. So it's not in the strongest position right now, but they also don't have an incentive to come back to the table.
And finally, both the president and the secretary mentioned Bob Levinson, specifically an American who went missing in Iran. We don't know the full story. That continues to be investigated. They assume he is no longer alive. Deliberate that they both pointed out his name in their remarks today?
Absolutely, because the Levinson family has been suffering for years, just waiting for an answer. And that's the least that the American government can do is work with other countries or try to find out answers about what happens to Americans when they go overseas. It's, the POW mission that we still run, trying to figure out the remains of people coming back from Vietnam and from South Korea. There are entire civil servant divisions dedicated to just making sure American families knows what happened to their loved ones.
Former State Department senior. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.